It's time to listen in to the stories for crossroads of business and family on the Got Family Show with Carrie Berger. Whether you're in the business of your own or want to be, this is a show where changes happen. Now, here's Carrie Berger.
Hello and welcome to Got Family. I am Carrie Berger, and as usual, we start off with the question of what have I done this week? Well, sometimes we have to ask ourselves that question, and this has been one of those weeks for me. I've had an unusual week. I've blended business and pleasure. In some ways, that is the greatest of all successes, if you will. My friend, Jim Baskett, who I shall hear about a little later on when I talk about him, he used to describe retirement as doing what you want to do when you want to do it. The fact that somebody else wants to pay you for it, or the fact that somebody else considers it work, doesn't change that fact. Doing what you want to do when you want to do it, that's retirement. Well, this week I got a little closer to that. I got to work with wonderful clients and wonderful friends around the country. I started off in Colorado. I went from there to Pennsylvania, went from there to Minnesota, went from there to Wisconsin, then I came back to Kansas. And that's why we've actually had a little trouble recording these things, because I was going for a little over 3 weeks, going from client to client and business and pleasure to the next. The neat thing about it is, and the point I guess I'm getting to, is that blending business and pleasure. You know, it's funny because each of you have a decision you have to make. Okay, do I work today or do I spend time with the family? If, by chance, you can find a way to combine the two, it really is kind of nirvana, if you will. And that's kind of what I did this week. I was able to take my wife with me on all but one of those trips, the part in Pennsylvania, and I was able to enjoy having two of my four children. The two oldest sons came with me, with us, for part of that trip as well. And so it's really interesting to be able to find those ways to do it. In the ideal world, when we talk about that from a Got Family point of view, we think of it as we're going to hire our son or daughter, and he or she is going to become our next generation entrepreneur. Great, that may be what we're talking about. But I guess what I'm talking about today is for those of you who may not be at that place where you're ready for that transition. Maybe your kids are too young, or maybe your business isn't quite to the place where it's ready for transition, or maybe they're not interested, it doesn't matter. Is there a way in your life to go ahead and combine business and pleasure? Can you go ahead and take that conference meeting, and since it's in Orlando, bring the kids? Can you go ahead and take that business trip, which seems not so exciting, that's going to Podunkville, USA, and make it fun? Bring the family along and have a night in the hotel and a chance to swim in the pool. The answer is yes. And I think that's one of the things that we as entrepreneurs need a reminder about every once in a while. Every once in a while, we need to be reminded that, yes, we have to work. Of course, we know that part. But while we're working, we can have some fun. And some of the things that are work to us are fun to others. And some of the things that are fun to others are work to us. But that's another discussion. So I guess my point about this week isn't so much a substantive discussion as much as maybe a little bit of an encouragement or a philosophy discussion for each of you to say, look at your schedule this week and ask yourself, is it possible that trip to the town 30 miles away and the necessity to buy equipment for next year can be perhaps turned into something that your son, daughter, spouse, or friend can enjoy with you? Can we go ahead and maybe extend it just a touch and have a nice dinner while we're there? It's okay to enjoy what we do. And I think that is one of the things that we as entrepreneurs do have as a challenge sometimes, is we have the world is resting on our shoulders. Everybody else says it's so easy to be an entrepreneur because you get to set your own hours. What they forget is that you set your own hours knowing that if in setting those hours there's nothing in the bank, that yours is the check who will not clear the bank. All of the employees' checks will clear the bank, and so will the tax man's. Yours won't. That's the scary part. Let's find some good parts in it. And some of the good parts sometimes can include the little things where while you're doing the work, you can go ahead and release the guilt a little bit, enjoy your time, bring in the family, and find a way to bring business and pleasure together. So anyhow, sorry, I don't mean to preach too much, but sometimes it's fun just to take a little moment and realize that beyond the specifics of what kind of widgets you make or I make, we're all still in business, and we're all still wrestling with the same question of what's business and what's pleasure, and how can I maybe combine family with business, which is, as we keep saying over and over again, where we all live, right here at the crossroads of business and family. This is Got Family. In a moment, we're going to have a little story about some of those same crossroads. We'll talk about that in a minute. In the meantime, let's take a break. This is Got Family. I am Kerry Berger. Hello and welcome back. I am Kerry Berger. This is Got Family. Today, we have a snippet which actually gets to be listened to or thought about from 2 points of view, because we have both the person who is on the, well, for lack of the better words, the outs or the current generation, and we have the people or persons who are on the coming up ins. I don't know what we want to say, but the ones that are next in line, they may or may not be family, and that's the whole discussion: is it family or is it not? This is a true story, and I'll let them tell a little bit of their story right now.
Coming from a blended family, I have a business that has been fairly successful. Now I'm looking to pass this business on to the next generation. However, I still have bills to pay for myself and my wife. Bottom line, how should I be looking at the numbers? How should I make this work?
Well, that's pretty much where we all live in some ways. You wind up spending your life building your business. The question is, how do I get the money out? How do I make it turn into something like a, quote, retirement for myself and my spouse? And in this particular case, he's adding in the dimension of who's going to be the buyer. Is it going to be an internal buyer, or is it going to be an external buyer? So let's go ahead and talk that through for just a moment, if you will. Hate to say it, but you start with yourself. And actually, I don't hate to say it. Forget it, I said that. I love to say it. Yes, you start with yourself. Heaven forbid you get to start with, can I afford my own life? I've worked all my life to make this happen. How do I take care of me and my spouse? My kids I love very, 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 very much. Ultimately, they have their own life to live. If I can help them, fantastic, but how do I take care of myself first? So you start there. So let's go ahead and run this analysis. We're in the middle of doing this right now. Step one, we're going to go ahead and work with this client and the one that you're listening to, or actually those are actors, but you get the idea. And they are going to go ahead, and they've already given us an idea of what their budget is. Here's what their income needs are. Here's what their sources of income are outside of the business. And here's what, quote, retirement looks like. I'm going to tell you, it looks really scary right at the moment. In running these numbers, if they don't get a dramatic amount of money, either in the form of a sale of the business or in the form of ongoing income from the business, they're going to have to change their lifestyle in a way that is almost inconceivable. So what does that mean? Well, that means that they've got to get either a big sale out of the business, or they've got to get ongoing income from the business. Okay, gotcha. Check number one is we're going to have to use the business to be able to support mom and dad. Got it. Next question then is who or whom are we going to sell this to, or who or whom is going to provide us? It should be whom am I going to sell it to, and whom is going to provide this. But anyhow, who's going to provide this stream of income for us? And in that particular case, we get two choices, insider and outsider. Okay. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Let's go back to the first question. What's it going to take to take care of mom and dad? In that regard, what's going to take care of mom and dad is kind of a number. Number one, I'm spending, my usual favorite number, $100. Okay, I'm spending $100. Great. Can I reduce that? Maybe, maybe not. Do I want to reduce that? Probably not. Is it going to go up? Maybe, but based upon inflation, and would I like it to? Perhaps. Okay, fine. That's the first number. What is the income need, right? Then the second number is what have I saved, or what other source of income do I have? Real estate that's going to provide an income, other investments, stocks, bonds, and mutual funds that are going to provide an income, things that I can look forward to, perhaps Social Security if you wish to rely upon that. But those are the income sources against that need of income. Great. Now what? What's the difference? Normally, this is the part in our game where if you are not a business owner, you say, well, I better save more. That's true. But as a business owner, you've already saved more by putting it in the business, right? Remember the old discussion, my business is my retirement? You've all said it. You know you have. So now that the business is your retirement, the question is, how do I get it out? Do I sell it, or do I take an income from it? And who am I going to sell it for, and who am I going to get my income from? For now, in this first section, before we get to the next commercial break, let's go ahead and just focus on what's the number, and then we'll get to how we get it out. The number piece is going to be dependent upon how much I'm spending and how long between now and when I'm going to, quote, retire. If I'm retiring today, retiring 5 years from now, retiring 10 years from now. This is actually harder than you think because most of you are convinced you're going to, quote, die with your boots on, right? And with that in mind, you're wrestling with, well, okay, I don't really need to ever retire. I'll never really retire. Okay, but what does that mean? How does the money come in? Am I really going to be as productive when I'm 82 years old as I am when I'm 42 years old? Maybe you are. Most people won't, including me. So then we go ahead and say, what other source of income do we have? So we look at the needs for money to come in. That's what you're spending. And we look at our sources that are not business related, and we focus on that like anybody else. Everybody is looking at it the same way. By the way, this is the point in our program where we motivate you to hopefully diversify some of your investments away from the business into other things, whatever that means for you. Again, real estate, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, whatever that happens to be, and you'll talk to your investment advisors about that. But you take care of that as best you can. You run that analysis as if the business is not going to be there at all. That's step one. When we get back from the break, I'll talk to you about step number 2, which is converting the business into something else when it turns out that there's not enough in those other funds to satisfy the income needs that you have. So let's take a break. This is Got Family, and I'm Kerry Berger. Talk to you in a moment. Welcome back. This is Got Family, and I am Kerry Berger. For those of you who are watching, we just turned on the lights, so sorry for getting a little dim there. Hopefully it's a little easier to see my ugly face now. Not sure if that's actually a favor. As a side note, you'll notice I have this nice shirt on. I'm actually not wearing any pants. Anyhow, that's another discussion. That's not true. I'm wearing pants. I'm just teasing. Anyhow, welcome back. Let's talk a little bit about the rest of the story that we were on a moment ago, and that was we're going to need money, heaven forbid, to be able to take care of ourselves and our spouse, right? And we're going to take some of it from the business because we don't have it all in the form of other investments. Yeah, we probably are all there. So how do we get it out? And the first part was a lump sum that either comes from the business from selling to an outsider or comes from the business from selling to an insider. And the only difference is that with selling to an outsider, the fact that you need more or less doesn't change how much they're willing to pay. That doesn't mean it won't be enough. That doesn't mean it will be enough. It just sort of is an independent analysis. And by the way, way back to point number 1, which was the needs piece, you really do need to understand what number is acceptable to be able to support your lifestyle so you can know if you can say yes or no. If it turns out that you get a really generous offer, but it still won't support your lifestyle, you're going to have a serious discussion between yourself and yourself, or yourself and your spouse, or yourself and your financial advisor to figure out how you're going to go ahead and either accept that and find other sources to increase your income or reduce your need, or not accept it and figure out what that means in the long run. So that's another discussion. Anyhow, with regard to an insider, we have a slight difference, and that is we get to work backwards. We get to go ahead and in those cases say, I need this much, and maybe I can say that it's appropriate to increase value based upon the risk-reward equation to go ahead and receive that money from the inside buyer and make the numbers match with my needs. But that leads us to our last piece. Under any of these scenarios, when you're relying upon other people to provide you with money based upon a promise to pay, if you haven't got the money in your hand, how do you know you're going to get it? That's the problem. It's not insurmountable. It's just part of the reality of that piece of the equation. Let's just think about it. I sell to an outsider and I've got $20 I haven't yet received, but I'm going to receive it over time. If they don't pay me, I have a lawsuit, perhaps I can try to take back the business, perhaps, and how you draft that document matters, but you're going to pursue it through those mechanisms. Probably that's the strongest thing, the closest you get to a guarantee, because you have the chance, if you draft it properly, to be able to take the business back. In fact, I actually have a client of mine who has sold his business 3 times. 3 times. Sold it the first time for a fair price. The buyer couldn't do it as well as he could. It failed. He bought it back, or got it back for the carryback amount. He'd already received a big chunk of money. He got all the rest of the business back in exchange for not being paid for the piece he hadn't yet been paid, that quote $20. He did it again, built it back up, got it successful, sold it to somebody else. They too could not make it work, and he once again got it back under the terms of the contract, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying that's what you want to do, but that is one of the realities of selling to an outsider. You are willing to set a contract term that is very strong and that you can go ahead and secure yourself, so the carryback piece, if you don't get it, still winds up benefiting you through other means. That's the first piece. Second piece then is we sell to an insider. Same thing, we're going to have a larger amount that you're carrying back, and so thus more at risk. And if they can't make that payment, the question is going to be, are you willing to foreclose on them as much as you would a stranger, or are you going to step back in and do the work? That gets more messy, and that's the reason why a lot of people get very uncomfortable with that second choice. Well, how does that compare to our third choice, which is I'm not going to bother to sell it at all. I'm just going to receive income for the rest of my life in the form of retirement payments. Okay, it's the same as number 2 when you think about it. We still have to count on somebody doing the work. The difference is we're saying up front, I'm going to be doing some of that work, or I'm at least going to be more closely involved with making sure the work gets done. That's the slight difference between 2, selling to an insider, and 3, taking an income for life. And that is that in a mindset point of view, if you will, in a how do we look at this and how do we think of this when we go into it, I know in the third choice, where I'm accepting that I'm going to receive a series of payments over my lifetime, I know that I'm going to be involved in that business probably in some way as a board member, as an employee, as an active observer. I'm going to be involved in making sure that those payments continue. If I'm not, then I'm going to just be rolling the dice and hoping for the best. And that is kind of scary. So that is kind of how this works. If you had an ideal world, then obviously the business just runs fine and the payments show up on time and the checks clear the bank, and that does happen. However, if you want to talk about the nature of most entrepreneurs, the nature is we do it ourselves. That's why we are entrepreneurs. And so feeling comfortable with just saying, it'll be fine, they'll take care of me, I don't have to worry about that, may not be your personality, and you need to factor that into any amount of carryback, inside, outside, or an ongoing retirement stream. So anyhow, that is the story of how it is that our business is our retirement. And that is the story that each of us probably needs to think about. And as soon as possible, and I mean that literally, today would be good, start looking at those numbers. Start looking at your own situation in terms of how much you're spending, what your income needs are, what sources of income you have as if you had no business to sell or to receive money from, and see, could you retire from that? If not, which most can't, then how much do I need from the business, either in the form of a lump sum or in the form of ongoing payments, and how can I structure that so that I can count on it? Word to the wise, the shorter the period of time during which you're counting on those payments to come in, the more likely that you are able to control and feel comfortable that they're actually going to happen. In other words, a payment 2 years from now or over the next 2 years may feel different from the payments that need to come in over the next 20 years, because there's a whole lot happens over the course of 20 years. Okay, that's the story for today. And that's kind of what we've been doing in our snippet. That's what we've been doing in our initial discussion. But let's take a few of your calls. Today we're going to be listening to somebody calling in, and again, it's not really calling in, I always say it that way, somebody who has written to us by email, and they have a question for us, and let's let the producer tell you what that question is.
All right, Carrie, we have the email here. As a reminder, if anyone has a question for the show, they can email you at carrie@gotfamilyradio.com. The email reads as follows. I've got a son who's a junior in high school, and he's been working in my business for the last couple of summers. He wants another job for this summer, but the question is, am I just giving him a job to get some money? Or am I really doing anything towards building a real next generation transfer of my business to him?
Well, obviously I can't answer that question definitively because I don't know the specifics of what you're dealing with or what's happening in your world. I guess I can say it this way, though. Of every business that I've worked with over my career, I would have to say that with perhaps no exceptions, some sort of a let's give Junior a job for the summer equation has happened. They sweep out the stalls, or they sort potatoes, or they do whatever. Whether or not it translates into an internship or an opportunity to really figure out if they want to be in this business long term or for life, that's a whole nother discussion. And I guess I would encourage you to truly keep them separate. It's okay to allow this business to be a source of income and allow your son or daughter to be a kid and to have a summer job that's with you as opposed to somebody else. It's also okay to have them have a summer job at the city pool or whatever else that they can do, mowing lawns, and have it not be. Just making some summer money and working is okie dokie. Conversely, though, there are certainly opportunities for a summer position to be the internship that does help lead to a long-term career in the business. And in fact, many times I would say that the next generation says, I started off doing this menial labor at the business. I saw what it meant. I worked with the employees. They respected me, I liked the business, and it led me to say, how about, and what's next, and let's consider. And so in that sense, as simple as the little jobs are, sometimes they really are that entry point that allows that person to say, actually, I would like to do this. And that's not such a bad thing. Whether it's a true internship, that's another discussion. You probably have to actually get some real structure involved if you're going to make it an internship that actually leads someplace. But exposure and opportunity to decide, that's pretty good. Either way is fine, and maybe let's not put so much pressure on ourselves. That'd be my advice. So anyhow, for what it's worth, that was our email that we just received. And again, this is God Family. I'm Carrie Berger, and we're taking a break. Welcome back. This is God Family, and I am Carrie Berger. And I actually want to answer sort of a larger question that I get asked on a regular basis. And I'll say it just as silly as it sounds sometimes, and that is, who are you? I have a desperate need to quote the Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid. Who are those guys? Where am I? Where did I come from? Who am I? And I want to go ahead and address that a little bit. The answer to that question is this. I came out of, I was born a poor white child, but anyhow, I started off in business when I was about 12 to 13 years old, and that sounds silly to say, but it's the truth. I wound up working in a little restaurant named Trails End, and I wound up initially as a busboy. Worked my way up from a busboy. I think I was earning literally 60 cents an hour, I'm pretty sure, and no tips I think at that time. Then I got to move up to being a dishwasher, which got like 80 cents an hour, as I recall. And then finally, I got to be a waitress or waiter, and I was a waiter, and that was good because it included tips. But I always really liked the back end of the house, so I went ahead and I went into the kitchen. I'm exaggerating this, I'm extending this way too long. Feel free to edit this as need be. Short and the long of it is I wound up working in the kitchen until I was about 15, and at that point I wound up meeting a gentleman, Bob, who gave me a chance to be a partner with him and some other gentlemen in a restaurant. So I started off, and it sounds silly, I know, but I was a partial owner in a restaurant when I was 15 years old. It's not nearly as romantic as it may sound, but it is what it is. Went off and helped open this little restaurant. We did that for a summer, and we had a great success, had a great time, and we had some good numbers. But somewhere around the end of the summer, they looked at each other and said, "This kid's 15 years old." And they decided it was time to buy me out. I think my buyout was 13 cents. And so I left that, and I got to go into Steak and Ale from Trails Inn. And I worked there, and I was restaurants there and yada yada. Long and the short is I went ahead and I worked in restaurants. I had a little bit of chance to be in business. Went from there, went into working as a tow truck driver and in a salvage yard. A gentleman named Mr. Cook gave me an opportunity. I was always the college kid, even though I'd never been to college at that point. I guess they knew more than I knew. At some point, went ahead and I did get to go to college. I don't know why, but I always sort of knew I was going to wind up in law school, and that's what I did. I went to law school after undergraduate. Undergraduate degrees were in psychology and business-related fields, political science, sociology, criminology, and psychology, actually, but that's another discussion. And so I wind up in law school, and there I discovered that, gee whiz, I don't want to be Perry Mason. That was a terrible realization for me to realize I don't want to be Perry Mason. And so at that point, it's like, well, what do you do if you're an attorney? And I realized then what else I didn't want to do. I don't want to deal with criminals or divorce. By the way, those are really similar behavior patterns sometimes. And so I didn't want to do that. So what am I going to do? Well, I need to make a living. And so I went into a business setting, and I went into the world of helping to support other advisors to businesses. And ultimately, I wound up as the director of estate and business planning of a small insurance company. That was all fine and dandy. I did general counsel work for a period of time for a smaller organization. And then at some point, I started working on my own. I brought all these things together, my background in psychology, my background in business, my background in the law, and that brought me to, well, I guess as the old saying goes, if you can't do, you teach. If you can't teach, you consult. And that's what I wound up doing. So for about the past 25 years, I've been working with family businesses. The way that actually happened, there's kind of a little more to that, and that is that I wound up getting in contact with a gentleman who was looking for traditional estate planning work, and I was doing that kind of work. I was doing wills and trusts and contracts and all that good stuff. And in doing so, I realized that, gee whiz, these people aren't talking to each other. And so somebody needs to find a way to bring all these ideas into one place and come up with solutions. So that was what I started doing. That's what became the nexus of my consulting business. I realized that what happens is that so much of the time, it's not that the advisors aren't willing to cross the line and work in the other areas, it's that they're not allowed to. As I think I've said in other episodes, if you go to the eye doctor and he asks you about your feet, you say, hey, doc, no, wait a minute, I'm talking to you about my eyes, right? Well, same thing goes for every other professional advisor you have. The accountant is the same way, and so too the banker, and so too the insurance person, and the attorney, and the financial guy, and all those other folks. And so they all wind up just staying on point and doing their one topic. And so who is helping you to ask the questions that may not be so neat and tidy as just legal questions or accounting questions? And so that's what I started doing. And so I've done that for the past 25 years. In the course of doing that, I met a gentleman named Jim Baska. Jim was a wonderful man. Oh, we lost him a few years ago. We lost his beautiful wife, Nita, as well. I miss them every day. He was the one who first recognized that what we do is something unique, and he helped introduce me to, in this case, the grocery world. Working with the grocery world, I worked with the Food Marketing Institute for a number of years. They then introduced me around the country. I got to write 3 books on the topic. I got to refine this art, so to speak, and at this point, the rest is history, so if you will. I tell you that story only for the following reason. Number one, there really is no straight path to where you want to go. And so as a consultant or as a house painter or as a floor labor installer or as a chicken farmer, it really doesn't matter. It isn't necessarily bad that some of your routes take you a circuitous path to get where you need to go. It's okay. Second thing is that in working with you, remember that many times you do need somebody who has some experience with some of the, at least the general ideas that you're dealing with. What it means to work in business, what it means to work in a manual labor setting, and also has some perception of what it means to be as an entrepreneur and to see this from the different points of view. Gee, I have to make payroll this month. I have to find a banker who's willing to give me the loan I need, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I do. That and the psychology, working with families and family businesses, it has turned into its own specialty. I'm very proud of the work I get to do, and I'm very proud of this show and the opportunity to speak with you each week. Thank you for listening, and thank you for letting me share this little piece of your life. hopefully my story and your story will have some, I don't know what the word is, but maybe some resonance, because you'll share your story with us. You'll come and you'll call and you'll tweet and whatever else, and we will share our discussions with everybody else. And in doing so, we can all be a little richer here as we live where everybody does, at that crossroads of business and family. I am Kerry Berger. This is Got Family, and thank you so much for listening. We'll see you again next week.
For more information on Got Family, visit facebook.com/GotFamilyRadio. Check us out on Twitter @GotFamilyRadio. To leave a message for Carrie, call 844-GOT-FAMILY. That's 844-468-3659. This is Got Family Radio.